So what I'd really like to do today is start by exploring some different disruptions, because I think if we understand the disruptions that are happening in the environment, then you can take those apart and understand the kinds of things you might want to design for to make sure education is ready for the future. So I'll split this into 3 different sections. First one, talk about some of those disruptions. Then look at those design elements, if you will, and think about how they apply to colleges and college success. And then further to the final segment, thinking about how they apply to career-long success, your success after college. So I'll begin with those disruptions, if you will, and start out by suggesting that because of these smart machines, professional work is being reconfigured. And a good example of that is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence represents something that's smart, but it's not smart the same way that we are, right? Artificial intelligence works not by trying to think like a human brain or have a computer structured as a brain. It uses brute force computing power, has lots of memory, lightning fast speeds. It can calculate probabilities and give you an answer. And artificial intelligence applies to virtually every discipline. And when you think about all the places it applies, please do not assume that things like artificial intelligence only apply to low-level tasks. Take pharmaceutical research as an example. One of the challenges with pharmaceutical research is you've got to consume a lot of information, and you're basically looking for a needle in a haystack, a drug that won't have side effects that will address a problem that somebody's got. Well, what do we do with that today? We take a lot of research, a lot of clinical data, millions of different records, feed it to a machine. The machine consumes that information. It uses artificial intelligence to do something called automated hypothesis generation, where it looks for patterns, and it's really trying to find that needle in a haystack to come up with a hypothesis that you give to a researcher and say, look here, this might be a good option. So you look for those needles in a haystack, turn it over to a robot. The robot will culture the cells, extract the DNA, track the samples, and lo and behold, you have greater likelihood of finding that drug or that compound that you're looking for. Pretty sophisticated stuff. And if you look at some of the figures from McKinsey, for example, they give figures that artificial intelligence is likely to change global GDP by something like 14%. Gartner goes into some closer term numbers that are pretty striking, I think. One of those is that by 2020, just a year from now, algorithms will positively impact people's work by reducing the amount of work. Basically, the algorithm will do things that we used to do. And the net effect of that is that a lot of time and talent will be freed up to do more detailed things. So in effect, as people, we will be promoted. So artificial intelligence is actually changing our professions. And along with it, I believe that we'll see that our occupations are going to evolve alongside these increasingly capable machines. And one of the other kinds of capable machines that we think about are robots. That happens to be a cobot, not just a robot, by the name of Baxter's. Many of you may have Baxter's in your engineering labs. Baxter is designed to work right next to people. He's not one of these big robots that's in a cage on a factory floor. He can stand right next to you or me and work alongside us. And of course, as soon as you think about robots, many people think about the word automation, and they immediately fear that there will be wholesale job loss. Well, that's to not really understand the impact of technologies, because historically, technologies spur the creation of more jobs than are lost. But it's different. So I'll give you an example, again, not from the low end, but from the high end. Surgeons, many of them will use a robot. The robot is called Da Vinci. Da Vinci is a precision robot for precision surgery. It can cut and suture much more precisely than human beings can. Now, just because a surgeon uses a robot doesn't mean that the job of being a surgeon goes away. It means a task is done differently. And to do that task differently, You have to learn how to do a new skill.
Sorry, put this down below.
Okay? Sorry about that. So it changes a task. It doesn't eliminate a job. And that's really the story, I think, of a lot of these technologies, is that they will change some things but not change others. There's a great McKinsey report that came out a year or so ago that's called Jobs Gained, Changed, and Lost by 2030. And that's really the story. Things are going to be different. You've probably seen a lot of the numbers. About a third of jobs are going to, people are going to need to learn new skills, upskill or reskill. About 10% of jobs will be in fields that we don't even recognize today. Now, that's not really new. When you think about things like computer science or computer programming, back when I was in college, those were not careers that you talked about. 10 years ago, we didn't talk about data scientists. So it's sort of a natural evolution. But what that really means is there's going to be a massive reskilling and upskilling responsibility that's shared by higher education, business, and government, because to do these new jobs, people are going to need different kinds of skills. And so these new ways of working, like working with a robot, I think mean that there's going to be a new division of labor between, if you will, man and machine. The graphic here is from a World Economic Forum report that is kind of instructive. And what it shows you are the percentage of task hours, not total hours, but percentages that are done by machines and by people. And in 2018, when this study was done, of course, the majority of task hours, 71%, were done by human beings. But you can see over time that that shifts, gradually swinging to a higher percentage being done by machines. Well, what's going on? Work is being unbundled and rebundled. Things are being taken apart and done differently. Really what is happening is tasks are shifting from higher skilled workers to lower skilled workers. Well, how can you do that? Because the lower skilled workers have some sort of technological assist. Might be an expert decision support tool, might be a robot, might be an exoskeleton in the case of certain types of workers, but it's that technological assist that allows work to shift to people with lower skills because the machines are increasingly capable. And so what that means is that workers are going to have to gain those new skills to complement the technologies that are being used. Example from Germany in one of Bosch's high-tech manufacturing facilities, as they automated jobs, they essentially had to take their skilled machinists and retrain them from using, if you will, a hammer and a chisel to programming computers. And what is implied in all of this is that workers are going to need to know how to work with digital technologies in ways that we simply haven't seen before. Gartner uses a term that's kind of catchy called digital dexterity. It's also the ability to work with information essentially as a second language, or you might think about being data literate or data savvy. And the skill requirements that I mentioned before are pretty significant. What the World Economic Forum estimates is that workers are going to need 101 days of retraining or upskilling by 2022. That's not even 3 years from now. That's a lot of time, particularly when you consider that the average worker today spends 25 minutes a week in some sort of learning activity. So it's a big leap for people to do that. And the concern, of course, is there are not going to be enough educated workers. In this study by the World Economic Forum, their concern is that half of organizations will lack the skills that they need in areas like artificial intelligence and data literacy. So those new ways of working are going to be really important. And of course, what we want is for people not to have to stop working and learn all over again and then try to re-enter the workforce. What we're really concerned about having are transferable skills so people can have these very sustainable kinds of career paths. And anytime you get involved in that discussion about transferable skills, you very quickly come to the discussion about soft skills. One of my colleagues who used to work at the Department of Labor says that that's a terrible term that was initially coined because there's really nothing soft about those skills. They're very complicated skills, and people are saying that a better term would be either employability skills or perhaps mobility skills, because it's things like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration. Those are the kinds of things that help you get your first job and to get your second, your third, and your fourth job. They're also the skills that allow you to move from one field to another, such as from retail to insurance to banking, for example, which many of us have throughout our lives. So the notion of mobility skills becomes really important in a world where you've got a lot of this upskilling going on. And when you look at the graphic, this gives you an illustration of the fact that even in highly technical fields, people need a lot of these skills. The blue histogram, the blue line, represents skills that are required for people in data science jobs. The orange is a composite of all other jobs. And so the point is, whether it's for teamwork, writing, research, creativity, those skills are in even greater demand in areas like data science than they are in other fields, which illustrates again the notion that it's hybrid skills. People need human skills, they need digital skills. You've heard about hybrid jobs, something that Burning Glass talked about a few years ago. I think that's turned out to be very true. People need both of those skills. A few months ago, the Strata Foundation coined a term that I think has meaning for a lot of people called human plus skills. You need those human kinds of skills and you need some technical skills. So they're increasingly talking about putting things together such as programming and communication, artificial intelligence, and emotional intelligence. So the point is those mobility skills will become more critical for us than ever. And because these skills are difficult to teach in a traditional course, yet the ones that are in the greatest demand, we're seeing a global skills marketplace emerge. And an example of that kind of global skills marketplace is something that probably everyone here is involved in, LinkedIn. LinkedIn actually serves a purpose that it wasn't initially designed for. LinkedIn was initially designed to be a matching kind of system to try to eliminate the skills gap. Because the notion is if you've got 500 million people and a certain number of jobs, you're more likely to find a match because you've got a lot of people to look at. Well, it does in fact do that. A lot of people find jobs and move into new jobs thanks to LinkedIn. But as soon as you have a platform that large, with historical data, with current data, and with connections to the labor market, you can begin to project where the jobs are going to be. And you can help people discover pathways to prepare them to get to those jobs. So platforms like LinkedIn are no longer just about finding jobs. They're about anticipating where they will be next. And of course, you can go to LinkedIn Learning and have suggestions on the courses that you might take, whether those are short courses, whether they're larger courses. And so it's evolved to the notion now of a talent platform. Platforms can do that. Governments are increasingly doing that. In Singapore, they have a major project called Skills Future. They're looking at the areas where they believe that their economy will grow in the future. They are putting a certain dollar investment on each and every citizen to allow them to upskill or reskill so they can move into those areas. So governments are making this a policy. And it's even happening in higher education. Harvard last December held a symposium on the 60-year curriculum, giving nod to the idea that we all have to develop talent, and it's not just a one-shot deal. You go to school and then you continue to go to school. So the notion of developing talent becomes important. So where I'd begin is by saying that digital skills will be required in all disciplines, and I think we're beginning to see that. Well, what might it look like in the curriculum? Here's an example from medicine. It's a course in medicine in the digital age designed by a German trauma surgeon, and his notion is that both patients as well as doctors have changed in the digital age, in how we communicate and the kinds of tools that we use. And you can see there a list of the different kinds of units that are included in the course, going all the way from social media skills to telemedicine to different kinds of virtual reality and the use of big data. And I think there are 3 things that he tries to do in his course that you can generalize across lots of different disciplines. So as you are thinking about how your courses are going to change, you might want to think about some of these. One of them is around data and biobanks. To generalize that, I'd go back to that notion of being data savvy, digitally literate. There's just about no discipline now where our institutions, our students are not going to be using big data and algorithms to make decisions. Well, I would ask you, what role do data play in our courses today? Many times, little to none. Yet, if you are going to rely on someone to be a professional in the future, and a lot of the work is being done by data sets, you would want to understand the quality of those data sets, the biases that might be included in those data sets. You would want to have some fundamental understanding of how algorithms work. So it's not just about data and biobanks in medicine. It's about how data has a role across the curriculum for all of our fields. The second one that he talks about with smart systems, digital remote systems, a lot of that's about this man-machine interface and how do you marry human intelligence with machine intelligence. And again, there are lots of different examples of where this might be different. In the law profession, for example, one of the ways of marrying human and machine intelligence is, rather than litigating things in court, doing online dispute resolution, which is a little bit like a gambling game. Really interesting. Be happy to tell you more about that later on. But there are ways that we're beginning to put systems together that we simply have never had before. And the final one down here, I think, is also really important. He talks about physicians needing to understand digital medicine and being able to weigh risks and rewards. So I would generalize that to you by saying that artificial intelligence, for example, one of the things it cannot do is moral reasoning. It cannot take responsibility for its own actions. So when you think about the role that smart machines are beginning to have, a question to ask is whether or not ethics will need to play a bigger role in the curriculum going into the future. So thinking just about how digital might be represented in the curriculum, this course in medicine may provide an example. One of the things that we talked about earlier, I think, again, those mobility skills, things that are hard to learn at a traditional class, yet are really important. Well, how do you learn that stuff? You learn to do what you do. You actually get your hands dirty and do those things. Experiential learning is something that we've had for a very long time. Many of us went through programs where we did a lot of problem-based learning, where you took a real-world problem and had to figure out what you needed to know and then solve it. It's an example of experiential learning, and it's very powerful because people get immersed in solving the problem. Well, of course, we have a variety of tools now that are not just problem-based learning. You can use virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality. We've been, for the last 10 to 15 years, been doing a lot more with games, simulations, and haptics. Well, it's important because people learn in less time. They remember the information better. But what's really important are the kinds of outcomes that you get from experiential learning. They're documented to be things like the ability to innovate and take risks, to solve complex problems, to collaborate across differences, different people, different disciplines. Those are the 21st century skills people are after. So when you think about how the curriculum might change, how courses might be different, maybe experiential learning will have an even greater significance going into the future. Now, when you think about these next generation digital learning environments, one of the things we still tend to do, I think, as people is think about things as separate. So, for example, we learn and then we test. Well, what would happen in a world where learning and testing, assessment and diagnostics were continuous, and they were fundamentally part of the learning environment. Well, I think we are, again, beginning to see that. This is an example of something called the Educational Companion app. It was developed by ACT Next. ACT Next is the research arm of ACT, the folks you know for college testing. And it sits on a mobile device. And it can be used for kids in K-12, for people in college, for people in the workplace. And you can see what some of the items are like here. It's based on what they call a holistic model. And the notion is that you don't just develop content knowledge in people. You need to develop the entire person. So there are 4 different levels that they have in this holistic model. One is core academic skills, things like mathematics. Another one is cross-cutting capabilities, things like problem solving. They also have a category for behavioral skills, things like being open-mindedness, being able to respect other people. And the 4th category that makes a lot of sense when you think about how do-it-yourself we are with our own learning is the ability to navigate your own education and career. So there are those 4 different elements to that holistic model. As soon as you decide what the model is, you can define skills, you can define sub-skills, and you can begin to measure what is in each of those. So you can see over here where you've got some of the sub-skills, and Alexa might have spoken to me earlier today and said, Diana, you said you were going to do something to improve your problem-solving skills. So I could go to my mobile app, bring up problem-solving skills, look at an area where I needed improvement. It would use machine learning to identify open educational resources, whether those are text or video. Well, you see tiles of video down here. I could go through a short video lesson. It could give me a quick diagnostic, update my skills, and I would have a new skills profile. And that would allow me to self-navigate many different things that I wanted to do. And of course, those skills can be developed at a young age. They can be developed later. And really what it does is it begins to give us the ability to create pathways for learners that are much more refined than many of the things we do today, because it's based on continuous assessment and diagnostics and really allows us to personalize things very differently. Personalization, really important in learning, and I think what we've discovered is that personalization doesn't necessarily have to come from a person. And so you're seeing a lot of discussion right now about virtual personal learning assistants and how they can augment human capabilities. It's maybe a fancy term for a chatbot. And in one of Learning House's report on artificial intelligence, you'll find some of these examples very well described. Chatbots can be used to do a number of things that augment the capabilities that people do. One of the early uses of chatbots that I think a lot of us remember was in Georgia Tech's online Master of Science program in computer science. In their artificial intelligence course, they built a chatbot based on IBM's Watson, and they called the chatbot the TA Jill Watson. And they didn't tell the students that it was a chatbot, but was highly effective. Some of the students thought she was the most effective TA that semester. It's gone on and been used in multiple other settings and improved upon. The picture you see here is of an chatbot application that is written up in that report called Genie, developed at Deakin University, that integrates a whole series of different activities and is designed to serve students from a mobile device. You may have also read in that report about Georgia State University, where they decided to begin using chatbot technology to help them during peak enrollment periods. If you get 50,000 phone calls or requests for information, there's no way with a staff of 20 you are ever going to cover all of those. They used a chatbot called Pounce, after the mascot that they've got, to begin fielding those calls. It was able to successfully answer a lot of questions. If it was a complicated question, it knew to direct it to a human being. They credit Pounce with having reduced their summer melt by 20%. Because they were able to rapidly answer the questions. I just read another interesting piece where Wayne State University has also used chatbots in a similar kind of fashion. And one of the points that they make very powerfully, because they have a very high percentage of first-generation college students, is that our students are willing to ask the chatbot questions that they are embarrassed to ask of a person face-to-face. So they're actually finding with first-generation students and students who are returning those some college, no degree students, that the chatbot is highly effective because the students aren't embarrassed to ask basic questions that they feel perhaps they should already know. And so I think one of the things that's becoming of increasing interest to us in student success are the use of nudges. And I think they really can guide learners to better outcomes. You know about nudges, nudging theory. Guy from the University of Chicago, Richard Thaler, wrote about nudge theory. He received the Nobel Prize in Economics for it back in 2017. So it's no small matter. It's highly effective in a variety of different areas. My Fitbit gives me a nudge, buzzing me and saying, you know, it's time to get up and take a walk. If you go to McDonald's, you might still get a nudge to, you know, do you want to supersize that meal? But those small suggestions can influence behavior. And in American higher education, we tend to use texting to nudge our students because it's the students' primary means of communication. If you want to read about a lot of applications of nudge theory, look up a guy by the name of Ben Kesselman at the University of Virginia Curry School of Education. He does a lot of research in this area. And a lot of the initial applications have been around student attrition. We're seeing some in the workplace now that we can talk about perhaps another time. But there was a study done last year on student attrition looking at 1,600 colleges and universities. Not nearly the entire gamut of colleges and universities, but their estimate is that student attrition costs our institutions $16.5 billion a year. Now, when you have reduced numbers of students, you have constraints on funding, increasing operating costs. That's a loss nobody wants to have. Two examples of how nudge theory has been used with texting to influence student behavior. One is around community college freshmen and getting them to reapply for financial aid. Of course, we know whether the students are in community colleges or elsewhere, many of our students simply can't go to college unless they get their financial aid renewed. Yet, people miss deadlines. They don't understand the forms. It can be difficult stuff. They designed a series of text messages, about 10 messages over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. They're customized with information about the student that comes either from a CRM or a student information system, but it basically alerts the student that there's a deadline and asks, do you need some assistance? Over that period of time, they were able to encourage the students to get financial aid. Turned out in the community colleges they were studying, the retention rate went from 60% to 74%, largely because of financial aid. The cost of implementing the texting platform was about $10 a student. The impact for the individual student, obviously immeasurable. For the institution, looking at those 12,000 students average that were involved in this study, they saved nearly $3 million of tuition and fees they would have lost otherwise. So the return on investment can be quite significant. Another study in the state of West Virginia looked at a texting campaign trying to get students to take more credits. We know a lot of our students will only take maybe 10, 12 credits. And we also know that students who take a low number of credits are less likely to persist and ultimately to graduate. They may simply run out of time and money. So the campaign was about taking 15 credits or more. Highly successful. The number of student credit hours taken per student went up by over 3 credit hours, and it was even more effective with low-income first-generation students than it was with the average student. So the point is, we can begin to use texting and the information we draw from some of our core systems to help students down pathways that we know are important, freeing us up to potentially do some other really important things. I talked about disruption earlier, and one of the things we really haven't talked about much are students as disruptors, but of course their expectations can be quite disruptive for many of us. And one of the things a lot of students have said is that they think they should have control over their own student records. And one of the things I've also heard said is students want to know why they simply can't carry their diploma or the transcript on a cell phone. I mean, after all, you carry everything else on your cell phone. Well, of course, it turns out you can. This is not new news to you all. MIT began a pilot on digital diplomas back in 2017, and they discovered, as others have certainly, that you can put a diploma transcripts on a phone and transmit those digitally. It can be validated by the employer with simply a passcode that they enter and get instant verification. Compare that to the way we typically do requests for transcripts now, which can take 8 to 10 weeks and have a dollar figure on it. This is pretty much instantaneous. The other thing that was discovered, of course, is that this kind of format can be more secure than the way we traditionally transmit student records. Digital diplomas are being used at a group of institutions in the southeastern United States in my neck of the woods called ECPI. I've seen New Mexico Community College using digital diplomas, so it's not something that's purely experimental. Some places are doing it, and employers are actually liking it because it's so much more responsive. Final point on digital diplomas, as you may have seen in April, a consortium announced with MIT, Harvard, and some European institutions to begin looking at how you can stack multiple credentials and not just degrees, but also micro-credentials. So I'm sure there will be more happening in this whole area. So the point is, if you think about some of the disruptions, there may be ways of applying those disruptions to what we currently do in colleges. But I'd like to change gears a little bit and talk about career success, because I think one of the big changes in the environment the last few years has been that there are greater expectations on colleges and universities, and the greater expectation is you're going to prepare students to be successful not just with a first job, but with a succession of jobs that may go over a 40-year time period. So it's important to think about the additional things that might be done to help people be successful. And one of those disruptors that I mentioned before is the need for upskilling and reskilling, but the lack of time to do it in. And so I would suggest that a principle that we might want to think about in our programs is that learning doesn't have to be big to be effective, that learning can actually come in all sizes. And a case in point is something called micro-learning. Now, I don't know whether you all have experienced this. You see it more in the corporate world than you do in colleges and universities. But if you think about even what an IT organization in your university does, you probably have to go through a training session on cybersecurity, right? Might be an hour, might be half a day. That kind of learning typically doesn't stick. That's where people are turning to something called micro-learning, where learning comes in small chunks, 90 seconds to 5 minutes. Why that size? Well, maybe it's not coincidental that people say that people's attention span is about 90 seconds right now, and that workers are interrupted every 5 minutes. So if you really want people to be able to learn who are adults and who are working, you've got to fit that in the flow of their life, so it needs to be short. One of the other things we know about adults is they're much more likely to remember things if they apply it. I think it stands true probably at any age. Don't just give me the concept, give me an application, and let me be able to use that knowledge, and you will pretty quickly be able to remember it. Microlearning is used in a number of different areas. The example I've got for you comes from Google. And the context is employee surveys. Happens in all of our organizations, right? At least once a year, a survey goes out to people, says, how do you like working here? Do you feel like you're getting the education you want? How are your benefits? Do you think your manager is supportive of you? A variety of different questions. And Google offers their managers what they call whisper courses. And they're offered the option to take Whisper courses at the point that they receive the feedback from those employer surveys. So as a manager, I'm sure you've had the experience where you get ratings and you say, that can't be right. Surely I do a better job, or maybe, well, gee, maybe that is right, I need to improve. So when they get the results of the employee survey, the managers are allowed to enroll for these courses. And you see an example of one on the screen. It's bite-sized, right? Starts out by reminding people of something they might have known before, such as showing appreciation will make somebody's day. And then it gives you an application, a little bit more text that you can read to remind you of things that you may have forgotten or you simply are too busy to remember. But then it gives you a suggestion about how to put that principle into practice. And the rule of thumb is that it should be no bigger than will fit on a sticky note. So you see there their suggestion that says, try this. Say to an employee, for example, I noticed and appreciate the way you handled a difficult situation in the staff meeting. But just that little phrase, whether you write a note, whether you say it to someone, allows you to show your appreciation. And the results of that kind of micro-learning for the particular Whisper courses is managers improved on those attributes 20 to 40%, and they overwhelmingly, 95%, recommend the courses to others. So the point is, when you think about needing to do a lot of upskilling and reskilling, and the principle that we may already know a lot of things, we just need to bring it back into the foreground and understand how to apply it. What if our colleges use this for professional development within them? Or what if, for our previous graduates, we brought them additional education in a micro-segment, intermingling macro-learning with micro-learning? Would that not be another way of serving that adult audience? A big part of all of this AI and robotics stuff is about needing new skills because we're going to need to do new things. And I think those new skills are reshaping the job market. But one of the challenges is, as an employee, as an employer, as an educator, how do you get the drift of what's actually going on in the labor market? We don't have good mechanisms for labor market transparency right now. And so that forces you into being reactive rather than proactive. Well, I think there's a whole new series of tools that are being designed to provide this kind of labor market transparency. And it's really needed because industries are being transformed. People need new skills. They need transition pathways to get from where they are to where they need to go. There's some new research that shows companies are much, much more effective if they reskill existing workers than lay those workers off and hire new people. But the point here is, you need to know where the market's going. The example here is from cybersecurity. It's a website called CyberSeek. And CyberSeek is designed to do two different things, although there may be more in the future. One is it provides you with a heat map of where the jobs are. That happens to be a screenshot of my area of North Carolina, the Raleigh-Durham area, and you can tell with a quick glance where a lot of the jobs are. You can drill down into some of those measures and understand what the jobs are, what the requirements are, what the salary levels are. So as someone who might be looking for a job or considering a major or thinking about restarting your career in a different area, you can get an idea of where you might be able to go with those jobs. The other thing you don't see in the graphic is another important layer behind CyberSeek, and that is it provides people with pathways. Because as I mentioned, a lot of what is happening is people are moving from an area they were trained in to an area they want to go into. I certainly am not in the field that I was trained in. It took a lot of bumps and starts along the way, but many of us make career transitions. What it will help people understand is if you started out and you were like a systems engineer and you want to move into cybersecurity, what are the courses you might want to take? What are the most in-demand certifications? What are the types of roles you might want to look to gain experience? So it will look at pathways to move into some of these high demand areas that people simply wouldn't know about before. And of course, part of what this data is doing is providing feedback to educators to develop programs, to develop certifications that will be relevant in the job force. There's some new survey data that I came across about a month ago that I think is very interesting. Certifications are of growing interest. If you were in Sean Gallagher's session just before this in the other room, he was talking about how many of these non-traditional programs are being developed. Students fully expect that they're going to now need additional education and certifications. The figures from this study were that 88% of current students plan to pursue additional education or a certificate. They know they're going to need to keep re-upping skills to be competitive in the job market, and half of them believe those credentials are essential to their career goals. And actually, if you do the analysis on the top 200 credentials, there are thousands of credentials that are offered, but the top 200, they have a job premium of 18%. So it behooves all of us to understand where the labor market is going and design programs that can help people get there. This connection between work and learning, again, really important to be thinking about. I think we're seeing more and more connections being created between workplace learning and degrees. An example, if you were again in Sean's session, you would have heard more about this, is a program involving IBM and Northeastern University, and maybe you've heard about it. The story starts on the IBM side. They've been a big professional educator for decades. Lots and lots of people go through IBM training for manager training, for technical issues, for project management, data science skills. And IBM decided to start providing badges to certify the learning of people that were going through those programs. And it's gotten to be really big. The figures are that 1.7 million badges have been awarded by IBM since they started this open badging initiative. Well, there was a conversation then between IBM and Northeastern. They said, gee, I wonder how many of those badges apply to our academic programs. Turns out about half of them do. The deans voted to explore what kinds of professional degrees could be built on those IBM badges. They've now built 4 of them in areas like data science, project management, and corporate communication. But at the time, last time I heard the Northeastern deans talk about this, they were considering up to 50 different programs. So when you think about not just IBM as someone who has credentialing programs, but Ernst & Young, Microsoft, PwC, any number of different employers, thinking about how you build on those credentials rather than having people start all over again may be important. In this case, up to half of that professional master's degree program can be satisfied by badges from IBM. And the final example I would share with you is in this world of continuous learning, how do you keep track of all those different credentials? Because if we really do believe in continuous learning and we can learn from all different kinds of things, it's a real challenge to track all of that. And one of the companies that is focused on doing that kind of work is called Degreed. They're a relatively young company, and what they really do is they provide an online framework to keep track and score different kinds of learning that you have. Well, tracking it isn't the big issue, perhaps, right? It's how do you know what that translates to? Because throughout my career, I might have dozens and dozens of conferences, degrees, master's degrees, certificates, do-it-yourself learning, Khan Academy courses, and just listing it doesn't help. One of the interesting things is Degreed worked with one of the founders of the FICO scores, you know, that little number that allows you to get a credit card, get your mortgage. It rolls a lot of information about you into a single number. Well, that may be overkill, but basically what you begin to look at is a world where learning can be aggregated and scored in a way that makes it more useful, both for you to direct your own learning and for other people to know what you know and develop pathways. So Degreed, for example, offers a kind of skills framework. They track 1,500 different skills and you can sign up and have your employees have a skill review. You can look at career pathing, individual development plans. It's important to know where you've got skills, how to tap those people, and how to allow people pathways going forward. So the point is, it's not just about getting skills, it's about how we communicate those productively.